The playground sat unusually still that Tuesday afternoon, the kind of emptiness that made Pamela Lee's skin prickle. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the weathered equipment of Riverside Park, a forgotten pocket of the city wedged between crumbling apartment blocks and the highway overpass. She had just finished a welfare check on Mrs. Kim 3 blocks away, and decided to cut through the park to save time. The air smelled faintly of diesel and overripe trash from the dumpsters nearby, but then she heard a desperate, choking sob. She stopped walking. The sound was raw and jagged, like terror wrapped in a child's throat. Pamela followed it carefully, her worn canvas tote bag swinging against her hip, her sneakers crunching on the gravel path. Her fingers still carried the faint scent of hand sanitizer from her last visit. At the far end of the playground, half hidden behind the rusted slide, she saw him, a small Asian boy, maybe 8 years old, collapsed against the metal support beam. His clothes were expensive but rumpled, and there was blood streaming from a gash above his eye, trickling down his pale, bruised cheek. He was clutching his phone in both hands, staring at the screen with shaking fingers and hollow, terrified eyes. If you're feeling this story, hit the subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what you think will happen next. Your support means everything to us. The screech of tires shattered the afternoon quiet like gunfire. Pamela's head snapped toward the parking lot as 3 black luxury SUVs roared in, their tinted windows reflecting nothing but menace. The vehicles formed a tactical semicircle, doors flying open in perfect synchronization. Armed men in dark suits emerged first, scanning the area with the cold efficiency of predators assessing their hunting ground. Then he stepped out. Han Jun-sik moved like death itself, unhurried, inevitable. His charcoal suit was immaculate despite the sweltering heat, tailored so precisely it looked like armor. Everything about him screamed power and danger, from the cruel set of his jaw to the way his eyes swept across the scene, cataloging threats and weakness in a single glance. This wasn't a father rushing to check on his injured child. This was a warlord surveying a battlefield, the other nannies scattered like frightened birds. Even Mrs. Chen backed away, her earlier authority evaporating in the presence of true menace. A sleek Mercedes pulled up moments later, and the stepmother's assistant emerged, the same woman who'd orchestrated this entire nightmare. She approached Han Jun-sik with rehearsed concern painted across her face, her voice dripping false sympathy. "Mr. Han, there's been a small accident. Richard fell while playing. Nothing serious, but we thought you should." "He's lying." Richard's voice cracked through the air, raw with terror and something else, hope. The boy stood on trembling legs, one arm still cradled against his chest, blood still crusting his split lip. He pointed a shaking finger directly at the assistant. "She said to push me down the stairs. She told him to." The assistant's mask cracked. "That's ridiculous." The child is confused. Han Jun-sik's gaze shifted to his son, really looked at him for the first time. The blood, the bruises already purpling along Richard's arms, the way the boy held himself like every breath hurt. Something flickered behind those dead eyes, something ancient and volcanic. When he turned back to the assistant, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Take her." His voice was octic. "Now." 2 of his men moved before the words fully left his mouth. The assistant's protests dissolved into screams as they dragged her toward one of the SUVs. No one intervened. No one dared. Pamela felt the familiar burn of righteous fury override her survival instincts. She'd seen enough powerful men abuse their authority, seen enough children suffer while adults looked away. This man, this monster in expensive fabric, had created this situation through his neglect. She stepped forward, placing herself directly in Han Jun-sik's line of sight. "You have a lot of nerve showing up now." Her voice rang clear across the parking lot. "Where were you when your son was being terrorized? When he was being hurt? You're the reason he's bleeding." The armed men stiffened. Mrs. Chen made a strangled noise. Someone actually gasped. Han Jun-sik turned slowly, his expression unreadable. People didn't speak to him this way. People who valued their lives and the lives of their families understood that men like Han Jun-sik existed outside normal rules, beyond consequences. His reputation was built on the graves of those who'd shown him disrespect. This woman, this nanny in her simple clothes with fire in her eyes, either didn't know or didn't care. "You don't know what you're talking about." His words were soft, which somehow made them more terrifying. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Pamela didn't back down an inch. "I know that boy has been crying for his father for weeks. I know he's been targeted and hurt and afraid because you're too busy with whatever empire you're building to protect your own child. Money and power mean nothing if your son ends up broken because you couldn't be bothered to care." Silence stretched like a blade. Han Jun-sik studied her with the intensity of a man deciding whether someone lived or died. No one had spoken to him like this in years. Perhaps ever. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Han Jun-sik felt something other than cold calculation. The fortress mansion loomed against the Seoul skyline, all glass and steel and cold perfection. Inside, Richard's screams echoed through marble halls that had never heard a child's voice before. "No! I want her. I want the lady." Han Jun-sik stood in the doorway of his son's bedroom, a space designed by Korea's top interior decorator, filled with toys Richard had never touched. The boy was wrapped around Pamela's legs like she was the last solid thing in a tilting world. "Richard." Jun-sik's voice carried the authority that made executives tremble. "Let her go." His son looked at him with red-rimmed eyes and held tighter. Something cracked in Jun-sik's chest. 3 years. 3 years he'd searched for this boy, moved heaven and earth, called in every favor owed to the Han family across 3 continents. And now that Richard was finally here, finally home, the child looked at him like he was a stranger. Because he was. Pamela knelt down, her worn sneakers squeaking against the imported Italian tile. "Hey, buddy, remember what I said? I'll come back and visit, I promise." "You're lying." Richard's voice was small and certain. "Everyone lies." "I don't." She met his eyes with a steadiness Jun-sik recognized, the kind that couldn't be bought or faked. "When I say something, I mean it. But I need you to be brave for me right now. Can you do that?" Richard's grip loosened. "Not much. Enough." Jun-sik watched this stranger accomplish in seconds what he couldn't do with all his power and money. The realization tasted like ash. The community center was a joke. Peeling paint, crooked sign, windows patched with tape. Jun-sik's driver had circled the block 3 times before accepting this was actually the address. Inside was worse. Mismatched chairs, a coffee pot older than Richard, walls covered in children's drawings that were more crayon than paper. Pamela sat at a desk held together with zip ties, reviewing what looked like grant applications with fierce concentration. She didn't look up when he entered. "We're closed. I'm not here for community services." Now she looked up. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, and something harder, like she'd known he'd come and had already decided what he deserved to hear. "How's Richard?" Jun-sik had faced down corporate raiders, hostile takeovers, senators with itchy palms. None of it had prepared him for admitting failure to a woman in a thrift store cardigan. "You were right." The words came out rough, unused. "He won't eat, won't sleep, keeps asking for the lady who saved me." He paused, then added what he'd never said to anyone. "He won't let me touch him." Pamela's expression softened, but her eyes stayed sharp, calculating. "What do you want from me?" "Come to the house, visit him. Whatever it takes to." "To what?" "Fix him so he'll love you instead." She stood, and despite the 6 inches he had on her, Jun-sik felt small. "That's not how trauma works, Mr. Han. That's not how children work." "Then teach me." He hadn't meant to say it, hadn't meant for his voice to crack like that. Pamela studied him for a long moment. Then, "I'll come, not for you, for him, but I have conditions." Jun-sik almost laughed. People didn't give him conditions. "Name them." "Full access. I see Richard when I want, how I want. No handlers, no schedules, no corporate PR, filtering everything through 6 layers of bullshit. If I think he needs something, you get it. If I think someone's hurting him even emotionally, they're gone. No arguments. Done. She blinked. Maybe she'd expected him to negotiate, to flex his power, but he'd learned something watching Richard cling to her legs. Money was worthless if it couldn't buy what mattered. One warning, June 6 said quietly. My world is dangerous, not just metaphorically. There are people who would hurt a child to hurt me. If you enter this, you can't leave untouched. Pamela grabbed her coat torn at one elbow. Honest wear from honest work. Mr. Han, I've been untouched my whole life. Maybe it's time for that to change. The mansion rose before her like something out of a dream or a prison. Pamela stepped through the iron gates, her worn suitcase feeling impossibly small against the backdrop of marble columns and endless windows that reflected nothing but cold gray sky. The silence pressed against her ears. No birds, no traffic. Just the crunch of gravel under her feet and the distant hum of something mechanical she couldn't identify. Then she heard it, a small voice, bright as a struck match in all that darkness. Pamela! Richard came flying down the front steps, his little legs pumping, arms outstretched. She dropped to her knees just in time to catch him, and he crashed into her with the full force of his joy. His small arms wrapped around her neck so tight she could barely breathe, but she didn't care. She held him back just as fiercely, her eyes burning. I knew you'd come, he whispered against her shoulder. I knew it. She pulled back to look at him, smoothing his hair. Of course I came. I promised, didn't I? Behind Richard, Han Jun-sik stood in the doorway, perfectly still. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made her chest tighten. He looked like a man watching something he'd forgotten existed. The days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Pamela quickly discovered that the mansion, for all its grandeur, was suffocatingly quiet. Richard moved through it like a ghost, his laughter trapped somewhere deep inside him, until she found the old Lego set tucked away in a forgotten playroom. What if we built something together? She suggested one afternoon, spreading the colorful bricks across the floor. Something big. Richard's eyes lit up, but then dimmed. Father doesn't play. Maybe he just needs an invitation. Pamela looked up at Han Jun-sik, who stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to enter his own home. We could use an architect. He hesitated, his jaw tight. For a moment she thought he'd refuse, retreat back into whatever fortress he lived in inside his own mind. But then Richard held up a red brick, offering it to his father with tentative hope, and something in Han Jun-sik's face cracked. He sat down on the floor, awkward in his expensive suit, and took the brick. They built a tower together, the three of them. Pamela made jokes about structural integrity. Richard giggled when pieces toppled. And slowly, impossibly, Han Jun-sik's shoulders loosened. He showed Richard how to create a stable base, his voice soft in a way Pamela hadn't heard before. Then Richard laughed, really laughed, head thrown back, the sound bright and unguarded. Han Jun-sik froze. His hands stilled on the Legos, and Pamela saw something raw flash across his face. Wonder, grief, relief, like he was hearing a language he'd thought was lost forever. When was the last time you heard that? Pamela asked quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later, after Richard had fallen asleep, Pamela was tucking him in when his shirt rode up. Her breath caught. Old scars crisscrossed his small back, faded but unmistakable, not fresh, not recent. But there, telling a story she didn't want to read. She found Han Jun-sik in his study, staring at nothing. His back? She said. No preamble, no gentle approach. His face went carefully blank. His mother, before she left, the words came out, mechanical, practiced. Richard was 3, she said. He cried too much, that he was too difficult, that I was never there to help. He paused, something darker crossing his expression. She was right about that last part. And your business kept you away. My business required certain distances. He met her eyes, and she saw the carefully controlled devastation there. By the time I understood what was happening, she was gone. And Richard, he stopped, his composure fracturing. He stopped talking to me, stopped trusting me. Pamela studied this man, this powerful, feared man who looked like he was barely holding himself together with sheer will. She thought about Richard's laughter today, the first real sound of childhood she'd heard in this tomb of a house. "You're a broken man trying to do right," she said quietly. "I can see that. But Richard doesn't need your money or your guilt or your distance." She held his gaze, unflinching. "He needs you here. Present, even if it terrifies you." Han Jun-sik said nothing, but his hands, folded on his desk, trembled slightly. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Pamela wondered if maybe, just maybe, this fortress had a door after all. The kitchen had always been Han Jun-sik's fortress of order, stainless steel gleaming under recessed lighting, marble countertops unmarred by so much as a coffee ring, appliances that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a home. His private chef prepared meals with the precision of a surgeon, plating each dish like edible architecture. Beautiful, lifeless, the kind of food that photographed well but tasted like obligation. Pamela took one look at it all and rolled up her sleeves. "Love begins in the kitchen," she announced, already pulling ingredients from the industrial-sized refrigerator. Not in some sterile laboratory where food goes to die. Han Jun-sik appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the space like a cold front. "The chef is perfectly capable." "The chef makes food for Instagram," Pamela interrupted, not even turning around. "I make food for little boys who need to remember what home tastes like." She moved through his pristine kitchen like a hurricane with purpose, pulling out pots he didn't know he owned, seasoning with the confidence of someone who'd learned to cook by necessity rather than leisure. The scent of garlic and butter soon replaced the antiseptic smell of unused space. Something rich and warm and utterly human began to fill the air. Han Jun-sik hovered near the counter, arms crossed, watching her with the intensity of a man trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. "You know," Pamela said, glancing over her shoulder with a smirk. "You're hovering like a bodyguard at a birthday party. Either help or get out of my kitchen." "It's my kitchen," he corrected. "But there was no heat in it. Not while I'm cooking, it isn't." She stirred something that smelled like childhood and comfort, then pointed her wooden spoon at him. "Besides, when's the last time you actually used this place? These pans still have the manufacturer's stickers on them." Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but close. The corner of his mouth twitched. Then, impossibly, it happened. Han Jun-sik smiled. Not the diplomatic curve he gave investors or the tight-lipped acknowledgement he offered subordinates, but an actual smile. Brief as a lightning flash, gone almost before it registered, but Pamela caught it, held it in her memory like a trophy. "There," she said triumphantly. "I knew you had teeth." The smile vanished, replaced by something more dangerous, a look that made her pulse skip in ways she refused to acknowledge. "You're impossible," he muttered, but he didn't leave. When Richard came downstairs and saw the spread, Pamela had created nothing fancy, just honest food that looked like it had been made with hands instead of tweezers. His eyes went wide. He ate. Not the obligatory bites his father's chef had grown accustomed to, but actual eating. Fork scraping plate, second helpings, the kind of eating that said someone finally cared enough to feed him rather than just sustain him. Han Jun-sik watched his son with an expression Pamela couldn't quite read. Something raw and painful flickered behind those controlled features, there and gone like a ghost. Later, after Richard's bath and pajamas, after stories and water and all the small rituals of bedtime, the boy grabbed Pamela's hand. "Stay," he whispered, his voice small in the darkness of his enormous bedroom. "Until I'm asleep?" She glanced toward the doorway where Han Jun-sik stood, backlit by the hallway, his silhouette sharp as a knife's edge. He gave the barest nod. Pamela settled into the chair beside Richard's bed, her hand still caught in his small fingers. She hummed softly, no particular song, just sound shaped by instinct. Richard's breathing began to slow, deepen, surrender. From the doorway, Han Jun-sik's voice came low and quiet, barely above a whisper. He sleeps faster when you're here. The words hung between them like a confession neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Pamela looked up, found him watching her with an intensity that made the air feel thin. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable or easy. It was charged, dangerous. The kind of silence that said everything they weren't saying, that named the thing growing between them that neither could afford. She should have looked away, broken the moment. Instead, she held his gaze in the darkness, and something fundamental shifted in the space between bodyguard and employer, maid and master, woman and man, something that terrified them both. The mansion's kitchen fell silent the moment Pamela walked in. 3 housekeepers huddled near the pantry, scattered like startled birds, their whispered conversation dying mid-sentence. Maria turned away too quickly, suddenly fascinated by the spotless counter she'd been wiping for the past 30 seconds. Pamela's chest tightened. She'd felt the shift in the air all morning, sideways glances in the hallways, conversations that stopped when she approached, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on the pristine marble floors. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease crawling up her spine. Maria's hand stilled on the counter. "It's nothing, Miss Pamela. Just staff gossip." "Tell me." The older woman's face creased with worry. "It's that woman, the assistant Mr. Han fired. She's been talking to anyone who'll listen, reporters, bloggers, anyone with a camera." Maria's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's saying you drugged Mr. Han, that you're some kind of gold digger planning to kidnap him for ransom money." The words hit like physical blows. Pamela gripped the edge of the kitchen island, her knuckles white. "That's insane." "We know that," Maria said quickly. "Everyone who works here knows what you've done for little Richard. But she's out there right now, Miss Pamela. At the front gate, with cameras. Through the window, Pamela could see the gathering crowd beyond the iron gates, news vans, cameras, and at the center of it all, a woman in designer clothes gesturing dramatically, her perfectly made-up face animated with manufactured outrage. Something hot and fierce ignited in Pamela's chest. She'd scrubbed floors, endured humiliation, rebuilt herself from nothing. She'd watched Richard take his first real steps toward healing, and now some bitter, vindictive woman was trying to destroy it all with lies? Not today. Pamela pushed through the mansion's front doors and strode down the driveway. Behind her, she heard Maria's worried voice calling her back, but she didn't stop. The iron gates loomed ahead, and beyond them, the former assistant held court for a growing audience of cameras and smartphones, clearly manipulated her way into his life, the woman was saying, her voice carrying across the driveway. "She's a nobody, a servant who saw an opportunity to exploit a vulnerable billionaire and his traumatized son. You're right about one thing," Pamela called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. The cameras swiveled toward her. "I am a nobody." The assistant's face flushed with triumph as the live stream chat exploded with activity. But Pamela stepped closer to the gate, looking directly into the cameras, then at the woman who'd tried to destroy her. "I'm the nobody who made his son smile again," Pamela said quietly, each word deliberate. "I'm the nobody who sits with that little boy when he wakes up screaming at night, the nobody who helped him speak after months of silence." She paused, holding the woman's gaze. "What are you?" The assistant's mouth opened and closed, her carefully rehearsed speech evaporating. The cameras captured every second of her fumbling silence. "That's what I thought," Pamela said, and turned away. She was shaking by the time she reached the mansion doors. Han Jun-sik stood in the foyer, having witnessed everything through the security monitors. His dark eyes glittered with something between admiration and concern. "Brave," he said softly, moving closer. "And incredibly foolish. She was lying. She was desperate. Now she's humiliated." His hand caught her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. The touch sent electricity down her spine. "You just made an enemy, Pamela. In my world, enemies don't forgive. They retaliate." The warning should have frightened her. Instead, Standing this close to him, feeling the heat of his body and the intensity of his attention, Pamela felt something far more dangerous than fear. "Then I guess," she whispered, "I'll need to be ready." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and for one breathless moment, the entire world narrowed to the space between them, charged, electric, impossible to ignore. The black envelope arrived at dawn, left deliberately at the mansion's front gate where the morning staff would find it. Inside were photographs, professionally doctored images of Pamela and Han Jun-sik in compromising positions that had never happened. Angles manipulated to suggest intimacy that didn't exist, timestamps fabricated to imply secret meetings. The accompanying note was brief and venomous. "Your son's nanny has other interests." By breakfast, the poison had already spread through the household staff. Pamela felt the shift immediately, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, the sidelong glances, the careful distance everyone suddenly maintained. Mrs. Kim, who had warmed to her over weeks of shared morning tea, now busied herself with tasks that kept her facing away. Even Ji-woo seemed confused by the sudden tension, clinging to Pamela's leg with worried eyes. Han Jun-sik became a ghost in his own home. He stopped joining them for meals, his study door remaining closed for hours. When their paths did cross in hallways, he looked through her rather than at her, his expression carved from ice. The warmth that had begun to thaw between them, those careful conversations, the almost smiles, the moments when Ji-woo's laughter made them conspirators in joy, vanished as if it had never existed. Pamela tried to approach him twice. Both times he walked away mid-sentence, leaving her words hanging in empty air. The silence lasted 3 days. 3 days of Ji-woo asking why his father wouldn't read bedtime stories anymore, why everyone seemed angry, why Pamela looked so sad. 3 days of Pamela maintaining professional composure while something vital inside her slowly cracked. On the third night, she found Han Jun-sik on the terrace after midnight, Scotch glass catching moonlight, shoulders rigid with tension. She almost turned back, had actually taken 2 steps toward retreat when his voice stopped her. "I had you investigated." The words came flat, emotionless. "Before you were hired, after. Every week since you arrived." He took a long drink. "Clean. Impossibly clean. It made me suspicious." Pamela's throat tightened. "Should I have committed crimes to seem more trustworthy? In my world, everyone has something to hide." He turned to face her, and the raw conflict in his expression stole her breath. "Everyone has an angle, a price, a weakness to exploit. But you," his jaw worked, "you're exactly what you appear to be. Kind, genuine, good." He said the last word like an accusation. "I forget good people still exist, you remind me, and it terrifies me." The admission hung between them, vulnerable and violent. Pamela stepped closer, every instinct screaming to close the distance he'd imposed. "Those photos are fake, and you know it." "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "I had them analyzed within an hour, every pixel screaming fabrication. But people believe what they want to believe, and my enemies," he stopped, turning back to the city lights. "They'll use you now. Use Ji-woo. Use anything soft to get to me. Then stop being terrified and start being present," Pamela said, steel threading through her words. "Stop pushing away the people who actually care while you obsess over the ones trying to hurt you. Stop treating connection like weakness and isolation like strength. Your son needs his father, not a fortress." Han Jun-sik's shoulders trembled, rage or grief or something unnamed. Before either could speak again, his phone erupted with alerts. 1, then 5, then dozens. He stared at the screen, color draining from his face. "What is it?" He turned the phone toward her. The headline blazed across multiple news sites, spreading like wildfire through social media. "Black woman caught seducing Korean Mafia boss to kidnap his son, exclusive photos inside." The scandal had gone viral, and somewhere in Los Angeles, thousands of people were seeing doctored images of Pamela's face attached to lies designed to destroy her. The poisoned envelope had been just the beginning. The mansion felt colder than it ever had as Pamela pushed through the grand entrance, her breath coming in sharp bursts. The marble walls seemed to close in around her, every pristine surface reflecting back a version of herself she no longer recognized. The woman plastered across headlines, reduced to a scandal, stripped of her dignity by strangers who didn't know her name until yesterday. She found him in his study, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured gardens. His posture was rigid, controlled, as if he'd been expecting this confrontation. The sight of his back so straight, so composed, ignited something raw inside her chest. "Do you believe them?" Her voice cracked through the silence like breaking glass. Han Jun-sik didn't turn immediately. When he finally did, his expression was carefully neutral, the mask he wore for boardrooms and business rivals firmly in place. That mask had never been meant for her. "Pamela, answer the question." She stepped forward, her hands trembling at her sides. "Do you believe I'm some opportunistic thief who seduced you for your money? Do you think I planned this from the moment I walked through your door?" The pause before his response lasted an eternity. She watched his jaw tighten, watched him weigh his words with the same precision he used for million-dollar deals. And in that calculated silence, something inside her began to splinter. "I didn't say I believed them." His tone was measured, diplomatic, devoid of the warmth she'd heard in whispered late-night conversations. "But in my world, perception is reality. The scandal makes you a liability." The words landed like physical blows. Pamela felt her knees weaken, felt the air leave her lungs in one devastating rush. She'd braced herself for doubt, even for questions, but this clinical assessment of her worth, this reduction of everything they'd shared to a business risk, cut deeper than any tabloid lie. A liability. She repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. "That's what I am to you now? Not the woman who's loved your son, who's stood beside you, who's—" Her voice broke. "I'm just another problem to be managed. You're being emotional." He stepped toward her, hand extended, but she recoiled as if he'd struck her. "Don't." The word came out strangled. "Don't you dare tell me I'm being emotional when my life is being destroyed and you're worried about perception. I came to you for protection, for truth, for—" She pressed her palm against her chest where her heart was shattering. "I came to you because I thought you knew me. I thought you saw me. This isn't personal, Pamela. It's not personal?" A bitter laugh escaped her throat. "They're calling me a whore in every newspaper in the country. Your colleagues are speculating about whether I'm blackmailing you, and you're standing there calculating PR damage instead of defending me. If that's not personal, I don't know what is." From somewhere in the mansion, she heard Richard's distant footsteps, the soft sound of his uncertain approach. The thought of that sweet boy witnessing this moment of him seeing her reduced to collateral damage in his father's perfectly ordered world was more than she could bear. Pamela reached for her bag with shaking hands, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. She'd carried hope in this bag when she'd left this morning, carried trust that whatever storm came, they would weather it together. How foolish she'd been. She placed the bag on the marble counter with deliberate care, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. Her keys, her phone, the small tokens of a life she'd begun building here, all of it felt contaminated now by his silence, by his choice to value reputation over her truth. "Pamela, wait." His voice finally carried something beyond calculation, a crack in that perfect composure. But she was already walking toward the door, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall in front of him. Behind her, she heard Richard's choked sob, heard his small voice calling her name. The sound nearly broke her resolve, but she kept moving, kept putting one foot in front of the other. Han Jun-sik stood frozen in the center of his study, surrounded by all the trappings of his success, and for the first time in years, the mansion fell utterly, devastatingly silent. The truth came like a blade, sharp, clean, and too late. Han Jun-sik stood in his office at 3 a.m, staring at the tablet his head of security had placed on his desk. The screen showed bank transfers, encrypted messages, and surveillance footage that told a story so obvious in hindsight, it made him sick. His estranged wife, Park Min-hee, had orchestrated everything with surgical precision. The doctored photographs, the leaked scandal, the assistant who'd vanished the day after the story broke, all of it traced back to her and a rival faction who'd been circling his territory like vultures for months. They'd weaponized his son, turned Ji-ho's fragile heart into ammunition. Han Jun-sik dismissed his security team with a wave of his hand. He sat alone in the darkness, surrounded by leather and mahogany and the trappings of power that suddenly felt like prison walls. The conspiracy made sense, strategically destabilize the untouchable Han Jun-sik through his greatest vulnerability, force him to show weakness, create an opening for his enemies. Min-hee got her revenge for years of a loveless marriage. The rival faction got leverage. Everyone won. Except Ji-ho. Except Pamela. Except him. He found her 3 days later, sitting on the steps of her community center as rain hammered down from a slate-gray sky. She wasn't huddled under the overhang or seeking shelter. She sat in the downpour like she'd forgotten how to move. Her hair plastered to her face, her cheap jacket soaked through. She looked smaller than he remembered, defeated in a way that made his chest constrict. His driver had pulled up to the curb, but Han Jun-sik climbed out alone. Rain soaked through his $1,000 suit within seconds. He didn't care. Pamela. She looked up slowly, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. When she recognized him, something flickered across her face, pain, anger, exhaustion all at once. "Go away. I need to tell you. I don't care." Her voice was flat, stripped of the warmth he'd come to crave like oxygen. "Whatever you came to say, I don't want to hear it." Han Jun-sik climbed the steps anyway, stopping 3 feet away because closing the distance felt like crossing a line he'd already destroyed. Rain ran down his face, blurring his vision. The photos were fake. It was a setup, my wife and a rival faction. They paid my assistant to leak doctored images. They wanted to destabilize me through Ji-ho. Pamela laughed, a bitter sound that cut deeper than any blade. "Does it matter? Real or fake, you still threw me out like garbage. You made your choice, Mr. Han. I won't be your weakness." The formal address landed like a slap. Mr. Han. The distance in those 2 words felt insurmountable. "You were never my weakness." His voice cracked on the last word. "You were the only thing that made any of it bearable." "Then why?" She stood now, trembling with cold or fury or both. "Why did you believe the worst so easily?" "Because I was a coward." The admission tore out of him, raw and ugly. "I was too scared to lose the only person who made my house feel like home. So I pushed you away first. I chose my reputation, my control, His throat closed. "I chose everything except what mattered, and I lost it all anyway." Pamela's face crumpled for just a moment before she forced it back into hard lines. "You can't fix this with money or power or apologies." "I know." Han Jun-sik pulled a small phone from his pocket, encrypted, untraceable, the kind his security team used. He held it out to her. "If you're ever in danger, call me. That's all I can offer now." She stared at the phone like it might bite her. "I don't want your protection. Please." The word felt foreign in his mouth. "Min-hee knows you exist now. So do my enemies. Just keep it." Pamela took the phone slowly, their fingers brushing for half a second before she pulled away. "Goodbye, Mr. Han." She walked into the community center without looking back. Han Jun-sik stood in the rain until his driver finally came to retrieve him, the broken man who'd conquered empires but couldn't save the one person who'd seen him as human. The 5th night broke him. Han Jun-sik stood outside Richard's bedroom door, listening to his son's quiet sobs through the wood. Inside, Richard refused the meal Chef Kim had prepared, another untouched tray that would be carried away cold. Another night his boy would cry himself to sleep, asking for the woman who'd become his world. "Papa?" Richard's voice came small and broken. "Is Miss Pamela ever coming back?" Jun-sik pressed his forehead against the doorframe, his carefully constructed walls crumbling. 5 days. 5 days of watching his son wither, of seeing the light fade from those eyes that had finally learned to sparkle. 5 days of pretending his own chest didn't feel carved hollow. He'd told himself he was protecting Richard, protecting his empire, protecting the Han legacy from scandal and weakness. But who was he protecting them from? The world? Or himself? The truth crashed over him like a wave. He'd become exactly what he'd feared. Not the monster his enemies whispered about, but something worse. A man so terrified of appearing weak that he'd sacrificed the only real strength he'd ever known. Pamela's love hadn't made him vulnerable. Walking away from it had. "Get the cars ready," he told Min-jun, his voice rough. "All of them." "Sir." Min-jun's eyes widened. "Where?" "The community center. Now." Rain hammered the convoy of black SUVs as they cut through Chicago's afternoon traffic. Jun-sik sat in the lead vehicle, his heart pounding harder than it had facing down armed rivals. Through the tinted windows, he could see pedestrians stopping to stare at the procession, 6 vehicles moving with military precision through the south side. Min-jun's phone buzzed. "Sir, there's a community event happening right now. News crews are present for a story about the center's expansion. The Vipers have people in the crowd. This is perfect." Jun-sik straightened his suit jacket. Every fiber of his carefully cultivated image screamed at him to turn back. To handle this privately, to maintain the iron control that had kept him alive in a world of predators. But Pamela had never asked him to be iron. She'd seen past the armor to the man beneath and loved him anyway. The SUVs stopped directly in front of the center, blocking traffic. Car horns blared. Through the rain-streaked window, Jun-sik could see the crowd gathered under tents, families, children, reporters with cameras already swinging toward the disruption. He opened the door himself before Min-jun could reach it. Rain soaked through his $1,000 suit as he stepped onto the pavement. The crowd fell silent, recognition rippling through them. He heard whispers, "Han Jun-sik. That's him. What's he doing here?" Then he saw her. Pamela stood near the center's entrance, frozen mid-conversation, her eyes finding his across the distance. Even from here, he could see the pain in them, the betrayal, the love she'd tried so hard to kill but couldn't. Jun-sik walked forward, his guards falling back at his gesture. Each step felt like shedding armor he'd worn so long he'd forgotten it wasn't skin. "I am Han Jun-sik," his voice carried across the sudden silence, steady despite the storm in his chest. "And I failed the woman who saved my son and showed me what love looks like." Cameras swiveled toward him. He saw familiar faces in the crowd, rival gang members, community leaders, the reporter who dogged his businesses for years. His reputation, his carefully maintained image, all of it balanced on the edge of this moment. He looked only at Pamela. "You saved me from becoming a monster," he continued, rain streaming down his face. "I fell in love with the most beautiful soul I've ever known, and I was too much of a coward to admit that loving you made me stronger, not weaker." He pulled a single white rose from his jacket, somehow still perfect despite the rain. In Korean culture, white roses meant peace, new beginnings, the surrender of pride for something greater. "Pamela Lee," his voice cracked, "I'm asking you to give me another chance. Not as Han Jun-sik the businessman, as Jun-sik, the man who needs you like he needs air." The silence stretched eternal. Then Pamela moved, her sneakers splashing through puddles as she closed the distance between them. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks as she took the rose with shaking hands. "You're an idiot," she whispered. "I know. You hurt me. I know. But I love you anyway." The crowd erupted as she kissed him, hoots, applause, and shocked gasps mixing with the sound of rain. But Jun-sik heard only one thing, Richard's voice, crying, "Miss Pamela," as he flew from Min-jun's arms into their embrace. They sank to their knees on the wet pavement, the three of them wrapped together, finally whole. Like and subscribe for more.